Every business needs to streamline and automate their workflow. Otherwise, you just feel like you're out of control. Well, that's exactly what we're going to check out. Qntrl used to be called Orchestly and it used to be part of Zoho One. It still is, and it is owned by Zoho, but they've actually separated it out into its own product and it's now called Qntrl, and that's spelled Qntrl. So in today's video, we're going to be looking at a high-level overview of Qntrl. So here I am, I've got a few test cases in here, but if we go up here and I'm just going to click on New Job, you can see we've got kind of like a form page layout. And in the top left, I've got a drop down and I can choose from some other layouts. So these are some process workflows that I've got in the system. So there might be a new blog post, send a card to someone, purchase order process, and all of these fields, most of which are customizable, you can just drop them onto the record. So let's create a test record here. And you can see we've got these buttons here. Now, if you're familiar with Zoho in general, you'll be familiar with the blueprint, which is this sort of button workflow process, and I'll show you the back end of that soon. But if I go to approve details, I've got another little form that pops up with some additional questions. Now, it's important to note that all the details remain available straight up, like every question that's been asked, every question that's going to be asked, and we can see any like space for attachments or comments. So I can @mention another user, or I can say any kind of comment, post it there, and then it's going to turn up in the history. So it sort of timestamps your actions. You can see the activity, we've got job was created, the stage was updated, and a comment was added. So that's handy if you need a audit trail on what's happened. Now, if I'm going through a large number of these, I've got these left and right arrows at the top, so I can just click on to the next job, etc. Now, you can view these in Kanban view, and just to see what's open in progress, etc. So you've got all these jobs here, you can filter them, and then you can select which layout it is that you want to be viewing. Now, you do have permission sets, and you can change what's displayed for who, but overall I think it's a very basic application that's not very well thought out. If we go to the reports here, we can see these are some of the blueprint workflows, and there's some other reports like who it's assigned to, what stage things are at, and how long things have been in the blueprint for. Now, you do have these default views. This one in particular is looking at the recruitment. If I select some of these, I can select a number of them to come up on the top bar. So I'm just going to go over to the settings gear and let's have a look. We've got orchestrations. Now, hence the name Orchestly. An orchestration is the process. So if I click into this one, we can see here's all the fields that are currently on the record. Then you go to the next phase, which is designing the blueprint. So this is where you get to create and manage the workflow. So we've got a common transition here where if there are different stages, they can easily reach this step. So this button will be available on the screen. If I go to approve details and I select one of these buttons, so if you're familiar with the Zoho CRM blueprints, then you'll be very familiar with how this works. So we've got approve detail before, so we can restrict who can see in the starting state, what happens during. So maybe we want to require that a comment is added, that a file is added, and perhaps that some other fields are completed. So maybe we're going to add the title. So then we go to after. So after is where you get to use some workflow automation. So we might send an email template, we might update a field, we might trigger something in another automation, or we might associate a custom function which will run through within Zoho. Okay, and then you've got scheduled actions, so you could have something happen in 7 days. So for example, it would move forward if there's no task or nothing done with it, or perhaps it'll send a reminder in 7 days if nothing's done with it. So then when you're setting the permissions, you can have only specific users or everyone in the organization use it, and then a final review, and then you can publish. So going back to the settings menu, we've got business rules here where we can set some rules for each of the layouts, such as when it's executed, like updating a field, adding a comment, and then we can add some criteria actions. So when it meets certain criteria, we're going to do something in the future. Schedules is kind of like a bulk action. So you could have that every 7 days that you delete any transition that's more than 30 days old and not done, or something like that. So fields are pretty self-explanatory. So it will tell you how many layouts that field is in, what the data is in those fields. Email templates, again, pretty self-explanatory, but not very well designed. So email in is a great way to start an orchestration. So when the email perhaps comes out of the other system, it's going to fire into here. So maybe when you've got something happens, for example, your e-commerce store gets an order. So every time an order gets processed, it can send an email automatically to this special email address, which will then start a workflow. Now, maybe if you, depending on the e-commerce platform, you might maybe say that's a refund request or it's a product recall or something like that. Then you've got these data mappings. So if you've got a email that comes out of the system that's sending to this email address and it's in a very consistent format, then you're able to grab certain details. So the CC email, the main email, and any kind of attachments. Advanced options, you can execute certain scripts. So if you wanted to create more advanced XML mapping, then you could do that. Coming over to public forms. Now, public forms is a way to allow you to give access to the blueprint or to trigger the workflow from an external source. So it doesn't mean necessarily that you can actually run the process from start to finish, but you can trigger it. So maybe it could be a contact form on the website, then goes into a process flow, or maybe there's a specific request form that's completed. So this might be good if you've got a new team member request or some kind of request that's going on from within your intranet, as an example. So maybe someone has a new laptop request or a new software access request or something like that. Then you can run that through here. So there are designs, and a new form could look like this. So I've just copied the URL and pasted it into a new tab, and we can see that we've got a new candidate form. Here's the questions that I want the initiator to see, and then they can hit submit. The only problem with forms is they can't then run anything else in the process. You can't go backwards and forwards with them throughout the system. You have to do it internally, or, maybe send them a message or give them a call. It's not something that you can upload some stuff and then send back to them, particularly if you've got a complex form workflow, for example. If I go to the extensions marketplace, there seems to be a lot in here, but it's actually pretty limited. The only thing that I've really had any value from is this multi-level checklist. So when you've got a lot of steps in a stage and you want to make sure that you've done absolutely all of them, you can add this additional checklist within a step or a stage. As you can see by the install apps, whatever you install from the marketplace, they'll come in here. Integrations, you've really only got a couple of options. So one is Microsoft Teams, again, not really well developed and doesn't really work. And then Zoho Click, which is relatively basic at the best of times. If I go over to organization, you can see I've got my basic details, what I'm calling things, some basic settings, etc. Now, you've got the REST API, so you can actually have it trigger from somewhere else. So if you build some form of software application and every time there's a particular fault, you want it to run a workflow or do some form of testing on it, then you can do that here. So implementation access is really only for the Zoho developers. Audit log kind of gives you that background history of what's happened in the system. Data backup, pretty self-explanatory. So users, I won't go into that one, but because you've got email addresses and YouTube doesn't like it, but you can just set your permissions and things like that. This is where you set your profiles to say what permission, for example, the admin or the service admin or the manager or the user. And then roles is kind of like your role hierarchy. So who reports to who? And again, email addresses. So I'm not going to go in there. All right. In the advanced sections, here you've got webhooks, which is where you connect it to other apps. And then there's some other more developer-y things, which we won't go into in this video. But as you can see, it's really, really basic. So if I go back to this one that we completed earlier, and let's just say we send the client, okay, and then we accept. So I'm just bouncing through a few of these stages. So they're really just giving me some steps. And in here, I can add a description. So maybe this is new team member. I can add some fields. Yeah, we've got those blueprint stages, but there really isn't a lot of explanation for each step or stage. Hey, if you're finding this useful, please give us a subscribe, hit the like button, and let us know what you thought in the comments. So I have used other workflow platforms that had just a little bit more finesse. For example, in the workflow processes, I would like to see some form of documentation. So I know exactly what I'm supposed to do with each stage instead of just getting presented with a whole bunch of fields. Now, even though we've got those blueprint stages with the buttons, it still requires me to know what to do. There's not a lot of explanation. I've seen other workflow platforms that allow you to embed video, have tons of text, have screenshots, that sort of thing. The other thing I would like to see is some form of external access. What if I need to do some really complex data gathering and I need to go backwards and forwards? For example, maybe like a loan application where the customer's got to fill out some information, someone reviews it, they might go back with some additional questions, then that might happen a few times before the ultimate document or the ultimate loan is completed. So it would be really nice to see some level of portal access and knowledge article or like guided process right next to the steps and stages in the workflow. Other than that, if you need to run your workflow processes and you need to have a controlled set of stages, then this might help you. If you want to go into more depth about training and guiding your staff, then you should check out this video on Trainer Central.